locked into the silver floor latches. The lower leg joints of the Krevhath honor guards remained rigid in the breath of peace posture. Within the Echo Vault, the Enigma Protocol demanded absolute stillness, a requirement the obsidian-skinned warriors met with terrifying precision. To an auditor like myself, the visual symmetry represented a triumph of diplomatic discipline. Only Kalen Vane, the human sentinel at the east portal, seemed to find the arrangement insufficient as he shifted his weight with the faint, dry rasp of fabric. The Archduchess thought she was safe behind her silver latches. She was wrong. Stay close, because the air is about to change. Archduchess Xylia halted her procession, her four eyes narrowing as they swept over Kalen's utilitarian gray uniform. She gestured toward him with a multi-jointed finger, a ripple of disdain moving through her gelatinous shoulder shrouds. To the Archduchess, the human was an aesthetic insufficiency, a jagged piece of charcoal in a room of polished diamonds. Kalen did not respond to the insult with subservience. Instead, he simply closed his eyes for exactly 30 seconds, his body becoming so still it mimicked the very statues Xylia preferred. Against the polished walls stood the Krevhath, their minds locked in ceremonial meditation. One formal transfer request Kalen submitted before the session even concluded, his intent clear on my monitoring terminal. Behind Kalen's stillness, however, lay a biological frailty I had long noted in his species. Hibernation reflexes often claimed humans during periods of high-stress observation, a minor glitch in their otherwise tenacious evolution. Reason for relocation? I asked, my voice echoing through the comlink. The map is incomplete, Kalen replied. His voice carried the flat, technical tone of a man reciting a manual rather than a guard seeking comfort. My species, the Valerians, pride ourselves on analytical clarity, but the humans' insistence on incomplete maps felt like a polite way to admit he was tired of the Echo Vault's high-gravity demands. I approved the request, watching him depart through the service conduits with the slow, deliberate gait of someone counting his own heartbeats. Upon his departure, I began a routine audit of the Spire's security archives. A specific pattern emerged from the digital data, the early reveal of a hidden rot. In the last 3 cycles, 5 accidental royal deaths had occurred aboard vessels where human attachments had been removed just hours prior. These were not assassinations in the traditional sense. They were failures of atmospheric processors or sudden hull weakness events. Curiosity turned to a cold, clinical unease as I cross-referenced the mortality data with Kalen's current activity. At his new post in the secondary monitoring station, the human was not sleeping. He sat before a terminal, his eyes darting across a grid of ventilation bypass valves that should have been dormant. Around the obsidian spire, the hum of the atmospheric processors shifted, a low, melodic drone that felt almost peaceful. Through the maintenance cameras, I watched Kalen perform his 30-second ritual again. His breathing slowed, his hands resting motionless on his knees. It was the hibernation reflex once more, a pathetic surrender to fatigue while the Archduchess's life hung by a thread. I prepared a protocol violation report, ready to terminate his deployment for such blatant incompetence. Came the harmonic shift. Beneath the deck plating, a subtle vibration traveled through the ship's skeleton. It was not the screech of metal on metal, but a sigh, the sound of a ventilation system being redirected into a closed loop. The Sovereign Protocol had left the primary egress points unmonitored by locking the Krevhath into their decorative postures. Kalen Vane, however, was no longer in his chair. Vanished. The secondary station was empty, the only sign of his presence being a small, handwritten note taped to the primary atmospheric sensor. It listed 4 coordinates for the Spire's inner hull maintenance conduits. To a human, these cramped, oxygen-poor veins were a death trap. To Kalen, they were a shortcut. Between the inner hull plates scraped the sound of human bone. Through the obsidian spire's service conduits, Kalen Vane moved with an anatomical efficiency that defied Valerian logic. I watched the thermal sensors, expecting him to wedge himself in the narrow choke points of the maintenance veins, Yet he slid through the titanium ribs of the ship like a shadow reclaiming its territory. Which meant the hibernation reflex was no reflex at all. That 30-second stillness, the behavior I had dismissed as biological weakness, now appeared as a predatory calibration. My monitoring terminal flickered with a protocol violation alert, but my attention was fixed on the Echo Vault's internal atmosphere. A specific nitrogen-rich compound was being introduced through the atmospheric bypass. In the archives, this was the exact chemical signature noted before the accidental death of Sergeant Halloway, a man I remembered only for the way he obsessively polished a single brass coin until it was thin as a wafer. High above the diplomatic circle, the ventilation pitch dropped into a haunting hum. Kalen smoothed a microscopic wrinkle on his glove cuff. The maintenance hatch behind the stage hissed. Into the silent Echo Vault, for operatives dropped from the darkened rafters, their movements synchronized to the rhythmic breathing of the sedated Krevhath guards. The Archduchess remained centered in the Echo Vault, her gelatinous shroud shimmering under the vault's artificial light. She was a biological ornament, beautiful and utterly vulnerable, unaware that the air itself had become a silent executioner. Kalen Vane moved through the silver shadows, neutralizing 4 attackers with a single, continuous arc of motion. A non-scheduled harmonic shift was recorded by the processor's subroutine at the 84% mark of the session. According to Valerian technical manuals, a 0.4% increase in harmonic frequency within a nitrogen-oxygen mix creates a localized sedative effect, effectively paralyzing species with multi-lobed respiratory systems. This was the Enigma protocol, a silent, untraceable weapon designed to leave the victim's heart beating while their lungs forgot how to pull. Calculated grace. The 4 operatives lay motionless on the silver floor latches before the Archduchess could even blink her secondary set of eyes. Kalen stood over them, a non-lethal graze on his flank bleeding a dark, steady red against his gray uniform. He did not call for help. He simply checked the time on his terminal and began drafting a 4-page technical report on the spire's ventilation vulnerabilities. "The map is updated," Kalen said when I finally met him in the medical bay. "You knew," I replied, my voice lacking its usual auditor's steel. "You knew the guards were anchored to be witnesses to their own failure. There is a lethal difference between a guard who faces a room and a guard who watches it," he said, his eyes already drifting toward the transport ships docked in the bay. He closed his eyes, beginning that 30-second map update once more. I did not see a glitching human this time. I saw a man building a fortress inside his mind, preparing for the next ship, the next vault, and the next set of corridors where his allies would eventually leave him alone. "Will you report the Archduchess's negligence?" I asked. "I reported the atmospheric bypass," Kalen answered, sliding a fresh tactical tablet into his pack. "The rest is just aesthetic insufficiency." The transport ship roared, its engines a white-hot flare against the obsidian spire's hull. In the empty corridor of the medical bay, the silence was heavy, clinical, and sharp. Kalen sat on the edge of the transport ramp, his head tilted back against the cold steel. The manual map update continued.